Hey friends. Well, I'm making my way to the end of this book, The Scandal of God, which it's a pretty amazing ride. It's a pretty wild ride. I'm just getting to the end of chapter 9. Not quite there yet, but wow. What I'm just finding myself so inspired by the altitude of the thinking and the just really beautiful way of describing both a vision of how human beings might engage differently with each other, and a vision of the role of tradition, the role of spiritual lineages and spiritual traditions, religions within that. And something that Alan said yesterday really sparked for me, because he talked about, he was speaking about tradition and saying something like, if the fundamentalists nowadays really understood their tradition and really knew the history of their tradition, they would know that to subvert tradition is part of their tradition. That it is actually it is one of the threads of the tradition to be subversive of tradition. And this, which I thought was just a beautiful way of describing how to hold a tradition. And he was saying the way to go is to go so deep into it, so deep into our tradition, and understand it so thoroughly that you can subvert it, and that what we know via the tradition becomes a tool for actually like loosening up the grip of the dogmas. And it reminded me of what sparked for me was the creative process, the process of learning a creative discipline has some similarities. Like, I think of, I've recently been studying, I just finished a teacher training course with Madeline on piano, and there were some parts of the course where we studied very specific arm and hand movements. There was something like 10 of them. We didn't really go that deep on all of them, but there was a handful that we really sort of unpacked and got kind of up close and personal with. But 10 arm movements? Are you kidding? To play piano? It's like, it's obviously a woefully inadequate toolkit to do the job of playing whatever might come our way. But there's a way in which we take the, in this case it was these 10 arm movements, but I could draw on examples of this from jazz and the way we learn the harmonic language and chord progressions and things like that. There's a way in which we take a certain kind of manageable number of set structures that we learn, and somewhere along the way at the time that we're learning them, it's kind of like, just do this. You just do this. You don't think too much about why you're doing it. You just learn that this arm movement is how you navigate this type of moment in a piece. And it may not feel normal. It may be different than what we're used to. It may not feel like it is necessarily intuitive. I mean, oftentimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it feels different, and especially if it's like we're playing a piece that we've already learned a certain way, then employing a new tool like this is going to feel unfamiliar. And it's a little bit like religious precepts or religious practices where, or even religious texts, dogmas in a way, where we learn them and we do them, and then somewhere along the way we start seeing and realizing, oh, I can break this up. I can totally break this apart. This tool that I've used just gave me a capacity to see through the tool. Or this, between these different, this, set of 10 tools, as I started to learn to use each one of them, now somewhere in there in the mix, I learned, oh, yeah, this is just to open my eyes to the infinite number of other tools. But they're enough of a concrete, kind of applicable thing that they do actually provide a glimpse of what's beyond. And I think that's kind of what sparked for me when I heard Alan talking about tradition and saying, because the typical response to a tradition that has outlived its usefulness is to say, well, let's just get rid of it. Let's just discard it. Or the revolutionary approach of we need to overthrow it. And most of the time, an approach that doesn't really understand what it's dealing with, what it's overthrowing, what it's dismissing, or what it's replacing, is not going to do a better job. That's not the history of, it's certainly not the history of violent revolutions, and it's also not really necessarily the history of revolutions in thinking. I mean, when we talk about a revolution in thinking, where great thinkers have fully exhausted the sort of capacities of a certain way of doing things, and then usually it's a couple of like pioneer leading light thinkers, like if you like graduating from Newtonian physics into Einsteinian physics, revolution in thinking, but not a revolution that said Newton doesn't seem right, let's throw it out. We still had to deal. I'm pretty sure Einstein understood Newtonian physics pretty well. I don't think that it was like he was coming out of left field. It was a leap, a quantum leap in our human capacity to understand how the world works, that grew out of an already really deep understanding of the way that we see it now. And I think, again, where it really resonates for me is in provoking me, which is already kind of my impulse anyway, but to use tradition, to see traditions, and I think this is what Alan is getting at too. I think he's even said this explicitly. See these traditions as magnificent works of the human imagination. These are grand, epic, incredible narratives. I mean, on the level of it, like like sometimes I have this experience when I'm reading Shakespeare or I'm seeing a Shakespeare play, and I'm like, how did a human being do this? How? It's perfect. The writing is perfect. The structure, just everything. It's like these, or listening to Mozart, or listening to Beethoven, the great composers, Bach. It's like, how did they do this? It seems there's such a level of depth and such a level of kind of cosmic meaning in a work of art like that, that it stuns me sometimes, that like one dude wrote it. Not that it necessarily would have been better if multiple people had written it. I know there are theories about this. That doesn't explain the issue. But religions and religious traditions kind of have that same status of just being these unbelievable works of the imagination that illuminate dynamics about the universe, about the human universe. And there's always, there's always kind of the cosmic spiritual dimension woven in with the social, political dimensions of the time. I think, you could spend many lifetimes as a historian or as a scholar of these traditions, kind of unearthing and teasing that apart. But all of it amounts to an incredible work of the imagination, and ultimately a tool that at one point subverted a previous way of seeing the world, and oftentimes united a much larger body of people around a new way of seeing the world. And if we can focus on that and remember that it's traditional to subvert tradition, it's part of the deal. It's part of what we're studying. It's part of what it means to embrace a tradition. It's not, we don't have to be afraid that by digging into a tradition or by investing in one, that we're kind of that we're limiting ourselves, or that we're closing the door to the new. We're actually it is actually part of the process to be in continual, like the catabolic in the body, human body, it's called the catabolic and anabolic forces. The anabolic forces are the forces in our body that build, that are adding cells, rebuilding muscle, rebuilding bones, rebuilding whatever. Catabolic forces are the forces that are deconstructing, taking stuff away that doesn't need to happen. Well, your catabolic forces break down, you're done. I mean, you die, you're dead in days. That destruction and construction process, is that continual flow, is health. It is human health on the physical body. Why should that be any different in our minds or in art? So that's what was provoked by my listening to the almost last little bit of this book. Probably going to go back and listen to it again. But anyway, thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate you. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.